talk a lot about reinvention on this podcast, hitting reset later in life, rewriting chapters, and refusing to be defined by age. Today's conversation flips that idea on its head because my guest is someone who's not later in life at all, and yet has made it her mission to challenge how we think about age. Jacynth Bassett is the founder of Ageism is Never in Style, a platform that challenges one of the last socially acceptable biases we rarely call out. What I love about her job is that it doesn't shout. It nudges, questions, and quietly exposes assumptions we've all made, sometimes even without realizing it. So today, we're going to be talking about ageism, longevity, and the cost of bias, and why this isn't just an older person issue. Jacynth, welcome to Hit the Reset.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. Let's start at the very beginning, as they say. Ageism is never in style is a strong statement. So how did ageism become your cause?
So it all dates back to 2012. I was studying law at Cambridge University, and I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. My family were all lawyers. I have a lot of respect for that profession, but it wasn't for me. And I started thinking literally late one night, about 2 a.m. in the morning, I couldn't sleep. And I was thinking about what could I do that had an impact on the world, had a positive impact, and really gave back to people I loved. And I very quickly started thinking about my mum. So my mum had me at the age of 40, which is not that uncommon now, but back in the early 90s was less common. And so I guess even though I had that light bulb moment in 2012 when I was 19, from quite a young age, I was subconsciously aware that, or even maybe quite consciously aware that my parents were older than a lot of my peers' parents. And I witnessed how they were sometimes treated differently, particularly as they got into their 50s by society. And I started thinking about my mum, particularly through the eyes of fashion, and how she loves style. She wants to look good. It doesn't, as she said, a love for style doesn't just disappear as you get older. And yet I would go shopping with her and notice how brands and shop assistants were really not catering to her in a way that made her feel good. They really treated her as if she was less relevant. They ostracized her, alienated her. Comments like, "Are you sure you're not too old for this?" Or "Is that really age appropriate?" Things like that were being said to her. And I started thinking, hang on a second. We have an aging population. We have demographics, wealth shifting. Why is there more options for me at 19 than there is for somebody like my mum in her 50s? So that was really the light bulb moment when I started to think about how we needed to re-engineer business and culture and society as a whole to be much more age inclusive and to really cater to the fact that our populations and the future was aging. So that was the birth of the idea. And then I finished my degree. I started developing a fashion business all around age inclusivity, very much grassroots on my own, using minimal savings that I'd earned through doing some legal work. And I launched The Bias Cut, which was my fashion business, all around cutting through age bias, a bit of a double entendre, in 2016. But very quickly, I realized in order to change the narrative around aging and hearts and minds, you have to get people talking about it. And even 10 years ago, people were not talking about aging as they do today. It was rarely spoken about, or if it was through a very negative lens. So that's why I started Ageism is Never in Style, originally as a community platform to drive conversation and to connect people globally. And over the years, it just grew. I was being asked to do more public speaking, consultancy for the likes of the L'Oreal Group, different organizations, research projects at universities. And it just became this phenomenon. So at the beginning of 2024, I uncoupled Ageism is Never in Style from my fashion business and brought all our work, our advocacy, our campaigning, but also our strategic consultancy, working with businesses, everything under Ageism is Never in Style. And that's where we are today.
Certainly, sometimes so interesting that a shopping spree can create an impact and make you do something completely different. Just curious, what was your mom's take on the whole thing?
I mean, she absolutely loved it. It was actually, again, very serendipitously, it was Mother's Day when I told her the idea, because she'd come to visit me at university, and she just sort of looked to me like, oh my goodness, you have to do this. And actually, even my brother rang me the next day because he'd come as well and going, you'd better do this idea or otherwise I'm doing it. And, and, you know, it was so interesting. We'd go on these shopping trips because we both love fashion and style. And I'd always come back from the shopping trips feeling happy and joyful. And she would come back really quite dejected. And then she said, it's not that her love for style had changed. It was just her body had changed, as women's bodies generally naturally do with age. And she just wanted clothes that were flattering. And yet there was one instance where she was told by a designer that designed very colourful, beautiful dresses. She said to the designer, what could I wear from your collection? And the designer said, this black shrug. And, it's that sort of experience. So she's been so supportive of it. And the funny thing is, actually, now she complains she's got too much to wear. She used to say that she didn't have enough to wear. Now she's got too much. But she's alongside the rest of my family. She's my number one supporter, and she's really proud of everything that we've done. But it's really interesting seeing how that experience, just witnessing it, the difference of experience really did sort of turn something in my head. And I wanted to give back to her. She'd given me the joy and privilege of enjoying beautiful experiences and shopping with her. I wanted to make sure she could have that too.
Just curious. I know I could ask you later, but I'm just curious. Did your mom's perception change, or did you see the society changing in general over a period of time?
Do you mean in terms of the way they were towards her and her
Yeah.
around style? Yeah, I'd say more it was society. Yeah, so she'd always loved fashion and style. She was a lawyer and went into financial services. She's retired now, but she actually had her own fashion business before I was born. It was maternity wear for women in business back in the 80s. So it was her side business. And so she loved style. And she'd also noticed back then the lack of offering there was for women in corporate careers. Again, there's so much now, but back in the 80s, very little options for her as a pregnant woman in the 80s. So I think it was more her absolutely how her body was changing, as everyone's bodies do. So she didn't, the aesthetic, her love and taste in modern contemporary style hadn't changed in the sense that it was evolving. It wasn't dated. It was still very modern. We have a very similar tastes. Even today. So it was definitely the way that other people were behaving to her and treating her as less important, less relevant. And actually, what I realized is it wasn't just her. So there was one instance whilst I was developing my work, I attended an event, a public event in London by one of the biggest fashion magazines in the world. It was open to all. It was meant to be for everybody. And yet the majority of attendees were much younger. And I started talking to a lady, though, she told me she was in her late 50s. And she said, most people here are much younger than me. And she told me how at the event, a member of staff came up to her and said, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. This isn't for you. So it says, I think that, again, speaks volumes. My mum's experience were not in isolation. It was very common for so many. I like to hope and think that things have moved on a lot now, and representations played a big part of that. Some of the models that we now see today who are in their 50s and 60s, we actually found them and worked with them through my fashion business, and it brings me such joy seeing them when I see an advert and see them on screen. So I think things are moving, but there's still a long way to go.
Okay, this is a question I think you've been asked a million times. How often are you told that you're too young to be talking about ageism?
Yes,
The thing is, do you find that ironic, or is it strangely
I
validated?
do. It is, so I get told it often. Sometimes it's more overt, sometimes it's more subtle. I think now that I've called it out more, people are maybe less likely to say to my face, aren't you too young? But it is ironic. And actually, I've had some instances where people have said, oh, actually, they've reflected on their own bias and said, hang on a second, that's of course ageist for me to think that, so I shouldn't say that. I've had other experiences where there's been some gatekeeping in this age and longevity space. It's still relatively new and evolving. So there has been some cliquiness, some gatekeeping. There has been instances where I've been asked to pretend somebody older is my boss just to justify our success and our work. I've had instances where I've been told, media have said, interestingly, UK media have struggled with me more than actually international media, have said, we want to feature your work and your insights, but you can't, Jacynth, be anywhere near it because you're too young. So I have had that, but I'm calling it out more. And actually this year we've set out 2 visions at Ageism is Never in Style. And one of them is age inclusion includes you. And we really want to make that point that this movement, space aging, affects you by virtue of simply being alive. You don't have to be a certain age to be engaged with this movement.
So what's fascinating about your work is that it shows that ageism isn't confined to one stage in life. And that brings us to the name itself. When people hear the phrase ageism is never in style, I guess they tend to react strongly. So what do you want people to feel when they hear that?
Well, that's a good question. So I actually coined the phrase out of frustration and anger.
Okay.
I went to an event that was for entrepreneurs to do sort of like a speed dating session with business founders, entrepreneurs, very successful, established ones, and VCs and angel investors. And everyone was a man, a white man, and they were very dismissive and derogatory about my work. And this was in 2016, and they told me it was boring. It wasn't interesting. I was also told I needed a male co-founder to be taken seriously, things like that. And by the end of the 2 hours of being told this, they were being told, is that even a thing? Is ageism even an issue? I was so angry that that's where the phrase ageism is never in style came from. But what I hope now, and I feel is, yes, it came from a place of frustration, but it also is just quite a powerful rallying cry of unity. And, it's a bit of a play on words about what's in and what's not in. Well, ageism should never be in the past, present, or future. And what I really love is it has become this unifying, almost positive cry of yes, I'm aging and I'm unapologetic about it, and I'm not going to allow others to make me feel bad or myself to feel bad about it, because internalized bias is a huge part of this. So I think it's now become quite a almost tongue-in-cheek, bit of fun, playful way to call people out. We've also got badges that people have told us around the world have actually, we've had some of our community message us and say, I've got your badge. And when my boss just makes a very subtly ageist comment, I just stroke my badge to make my point. And so I think it's become quite powerful in that way. Interestingly, it defies the kind of theory around phrases. Again, PR have told me historically it's a negative, you can't use that as a phrase. But actually, it resonated and it made a difference. And so I've said, if it made a difference and people connected to it, then that's what I love. So yeah, I see it now as much more as almost a positive, playful, rallying, unifying cry that connects everybody and speaks as much to culture and society as it does to business, because as you know, a huge amount of our work is in the strategic consultancy space, working with organizations to unlock intergenerational and age inclusive power and intelligence. But most of that is threatened by ageism. So it's all about how we can turn bias into eliminating it and then actually leveraging strength for companies as much as for society.
So at its core, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Is it the attitude problem? Is it the system problem? Or is it the everyday behavior? And if you can share some experience around
I
it.
mean, I would love to say, hopefully it's all of it. It's all an ecosystem. So there's 3 forms of ageism. Interpersonal ageism. So that's how we might speak to each other and interact with each other. Phrases like, you're too old or you're too young are a good example, but it also can be hidden through humor, through microaggressions. It can be hidden through backhanded compliments. So things like, wow, you're so mature for your age,
Right.
as if it's, it's patronizing, or you look good for your age. It comes with ageist caveats. So that's one example of that's one form of ageism, is interpersonal ageism. Then there's systemic ageism, which is very much around systems, workplace, maybe mandatory retirement ages, caps on age, such as we've done things around in the healthcare space, around perhaps things like mammograms being capped at a certain age, things like that. And then there's the other form, which is, I would argue, even though they all interconnect, it's the most powerful one, which is internalized ageism. So that is obviously how we have absorbed messages and it's warped our perception around age. And studies have found that we internalize ageist stereotypes and narratives from as young as the age of 4. So these are things like birthday cards that we see around us that make comments about being bad about getting older, or even making a joke about someone getting older. The evil witch in fairy tales that have told us that this older woman is to be fearful and all she wants is youth. And things like anti-aging creams, this messaging everywhere. We internalize all of it. So it's a big challenge. It's a big mission. But yes, ideally, that's what we want to. That's what we do at Ageism is Never in Style, is we look at all three pieces, how they interconnect, and the ecosystem. So we say that we specialize in culture and business. So very much looking at that lens of both in the corporate and the business and entrepreneurial space, but also how wider culture affects our perceptions around aging. But we're also now doing more work in the policy space. But I would say we can't have one without the other. So they're all leverages and levers. And there are some people who focus on some areas, some who focus on others. One of the things that we've been told is how powerful our work is around the cultural space, because even things like film, it makes a big difference. So that's what we're really working to do. And if we can address these issues and to unlock age inclusivity and intergenerational societies and structures.
So we'll talk about corporate later. I have a few questions around that. You brought about this socially acceptable ageist comments we still hear. The one people say with a smile thinking it's harmless. I mean, the comments you made about you look very young, too mature for your age, overqualified, need young blood in corporates. So how do we address it? I mean, can you give us a few examples of, if someone tells me that, how am I supposed to react?
Well, I always say context is everything. So,
Okay.
we have to be sensitive to the fact that often it's not meant with malice, and it's because of our own systemic and institutionalized norms. And as you say, if we're saying about just common phrases that are meant to be a compliment,
Hmm.
some people would say call it out straight away. My answer is think about the context first of all. There are definitely instances where it's worth calling out. Just yesterday, I sent an email to an organization highlighting the ageist language they had used, but I said it very constructively, and they've come back with a great response going, thank you, we're learning, and that's great. The one that I actually find, though, when talking just to somebody on a one-on-one level, can be very powerful, is to just say the phrase, why did you say it quite like that? Or why did you think of it just like that? Asking a why can be a really good way to get someone to reflect, and also ourselves to reflect. The World Health Organization says that 1 in 2 people have heavily ageist beliefs, but I think everybody has ageist attitudes internalized in them to some degree or another. Even those of us working in this space every single day have to make sure we are self-aware and check on ourselves.
I think it's about the awareness, and that is kind of picking up pace now. And
Yes.
I could associate it with the gender bias that we had about 20 years ago, right?
Right.
It took a long time. We haven't reached the desired result yet, but I guess we're getting there. So I think it's similar to that.
Exactly. And as I say I think those of us who've been in this space for me, it's been about 12 years. Others, they've been in it for decades.
Yeah.
We can feel quite impatient. We can feel quite frustrated because we'll see the conversation as finally being talked about, but not necessarily in the right way, or maybe it's feeling like it's been a long time coming. But exactly as you say, there are other movements, other civil rights, gender, ethnicity, race, all these movements that none of them we've seen progress, but none of them have reached a point of completion. So we have to be patient. And the reality is the progress that we've seen in the last 10 years is phenomenal.
When you talk about policies, I'm just taking an example. When they talk about doing something for the senior people, it's all about, about health. It's about, ensuring that from a housing perspective, things are taken care of so they don't slip, fall. It hasn't gone beyond that, right? I mean, it's still around health. It is not about, they need a purpose in life. Let's let them work longer, let them do something else.
Yes.
The reason why I'm asking is, you get sidelined, you push just because of a number, it could be
Right.
60, 65. So what's your take on that?
So I think, we need to stop having our numbers. I think we have to think more around life stage than age. I don't believe that age itself is entirely irrelevant. I know a lot of people use the phrase age is irrelevant or age is just a number. I would argue it isn't, because age is real and we shouldn't be blind to age. And with age does come more commonly certain experiences, certain biological changes, certain different pressures and concerns, things like that, and experiences. But that's why we need to be a little bit more fluid and not just have a rigid number, but think more about life stage. And exactly what you're saying around the idea that, focusing more on the health and the physical, we need to have a lot more around the social side of aging and actually the social benefits of and the social science behind having purpose, as you say, having ambition. But ambition can be in many different forms. It doesn't have to be that you want to be the top of a company or a CEO. It can be your ambition to achieve something in your personal life. We need to really be able to unlock a lot of that. And we do a lot of that through our messaging, this idea of it's never too late to do something that you've always wanted to do. And I do see quite a lot of companies, and now they're not. The interesting thing at the moment is they're finally realizing there's an issue, but they aren't trained to understand how to address it. And that's where we're coming in to work with a lot of firms and global organizations to help them re-engineer their structures, because they're seeing the fact that I've spoken to a number of people, for example, senior partners in law firms. The business model is built on that they will retire because they need to then bring in new partners. And yet there are a number who are saying to me, who've pulled me aside actually at events and said, I really think our firm needs to talk to you because I'm being pushed out now and I'm not ready to retire. Doesn't mean I don't necessarily want to have the same billable hours that I had 10 years ago, but I still have a lot to bring and offer and work. And so there are some companies that are now starting to work out sort of new ways to retain that talent and retain that expertise that really contributes to the well-being from a social and a purpose-driven side as much as a health, with 60 plus employees. But it's definitely, there's going to be a bit of a bubble burst, I think, coming. I think in that one of the reasons this whole movement, I would argue, there's a lot of reasons why it's really suddenly taken off. But one of them is that the stats, the timeline's caught up with the stats. A lot of the conversations have been like, by 2030, this will happen. By 2050, okay, we're not at 2050 yet, but for example, by 2030, nearly 50% of the UK workforce will be over 50. We said that 10 years ago, but people saw that as a future problem. Now they're realizing, oh, hang on, this is only a few years off now. And those companies that are realizing that are getting ahead. But there are some that their business model is going to burst, but maybe still in another 10, 15 years. So they're not ready yet. They're not engaging. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. But what I think is also brilliant is podcasts like this, speakers, writers who are actively speaking and advocating for the fact that, no, at 60, 65, I'm not done. My dad is 73 this year and he's still working. He keeps every year, he says, I'll retire next year. He's not going to retire, I think, at all. So, it's and he has such ability, he has such to contribute, and yet he said to me he's now starting to feel sidelined. So we've got to do a lot of work around those perceptions.
The reason is we're living longer than any generation before us,
Yeah.
right? And the birth rates are going down. So we built a platform which focuses on senior professionals above 50 to see if we can get them either gigs or fractional roles, because we realized there is a lack of awareness in the corporate space even now. And and purpose is very, very key to anybody in their later stage of life. And it's been very difficult. All the more reason is now with AI being thrown in, I think there is a clause which says if the person has 25 years, or if there is, if you know the age,
They'll
it
not kind
reads
of
you
much
out.
value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't even get a response from them. And
Yeah.
we spoke to hundreds of these people before the platform. We spoke to corporates. The awareness seems to be very low even till today. And
It is low, but the interesting thing with AI is it actually, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense of it's not good how either side of the spectrum, but what's really interesting is through applicants and through CVs and things like that, AI bias can eliminate and remove people if it works out that they're older. But the interesting thing is AI actually increases the need for older workers because the roles that it can actually replace are generally more automated and more junior roles, which typically may be somebody younger. So actually, we need to have older workers with their lived experience, with their knowledge that they can, and their critical thinking skills, so they can work with AI and also work with younger talent to ensure those skills are harnessed and passed on, and to ensure you build workplace resilience and sustainability. And what's interesting is I'm hearing also, so I hear exactly what you're saying from people who are over 50, over 60 being screened out through AI. And at the other end of the spectrum, I hear a lot of younger people really worried about them not being able to get any jobs through AI. So actually, the increased use of AI, let's be honest, is going to be part of our workplace norms. Whether it's going to be, I think there's going to be a bit of, again, a bubble burst coming, but actually, again, it compounds the need for human and intergenerational teams of all ages. So, and as you said, it's the awareness piece, and that's what we're doing an awful lot of work around. And we have a report coming out with a global digital marketing agency that looks at the state of age across 6 different countries, across different continents, that already is showing some very interesting insights and data. So that's where we do a lot of our working culture to really build that awareness piece, because then they engage. I mean, when we talk about ERGs, employee resource groups, there are not many around age, but they are starting to grow. Now, I never say that, I don't think they're the answer. I think they're an entry point of awareness and conversation, and we need to do more than that. But we did an event with BP last year, and it kicked off their entire allyship month around and it was on age awareness. And now, because of its success, there are new chapters opening around the world within the company. So that is progress. So, and a lot of companies are not putting it on their agenda, and that's obviously what we're then doing is calling for them to put it on their agenda, because when they do, it's really interesting how much everyone realizes it affects them, and it's going to affect everyone.
So which mindsets do you think need the biggest reset? Is it individuals, organization, or policymakers? In which sequence do you think it should happen?
Good question. Personally, I believe it has to come from the individual first, but that individual can be somebody who's very senior. As much. So, this is why we've got to get C-suite boards, engaged as well. And that's why I say things like ERGs are fantastic. They offer really good safe spaces, but they have to have the power to influence change. And you need to make sure there are senior leaders involved in them as well. I know that some will say that policy comes first, and I think that there are policies that are making a difference, but they're not making a difference in quite the way that they could do if the individual implementing the policy has been better informed and better has reflected on their internal bias. So for me, whilst it's an ecosystem, and I think we have to pull levers at different points and different times, I believe change has to come from within. But that's why things like, again, culture, CEOs are influenced by culture. The idea that they're not looking at, they are. So they are looking at what's going on in the world and the economics. So I would say it has to be the individual, and lots of different ways people are advocating, from grassroots to more corporate internal pieces. Lasting, sustainable, and truly effective change has to come through the individual having worked with it in themselves, because I see this in the longevity and the age sector. There's still a lot of ageism. I see a lot of ageist comments where people will say they're a longevity leader, but will say, don't get old. Or I'll see somebody who will advocate. This is a lot on LinkedIn at the moment. There are a lot of people who are now talking about ageism, but they're being ageist towards younger people in doing so. They're not realizing that their commentary is actually quite ageist. So until we reflect on that internal bias, the output and the work that we create, even as the leaders in this space, will not be as effective and sustainable unless we have addressed those internal biases.
Since you said individual, how has your work changed on how you think about your own future? Give us a few examples.
Sure. I think sometimes I think too much about the future, I think, because of my work. I think sometimes people are like, you're 33, you can enjoy being, the age you are right now. I'm constantly thinking about my future. It's made me very aware of the challenges and struggles that people, as they can get older, go through. Things very personally right now I'm going through with family around power of attorney, wills, things like that, social care. It's made me very aware of that, issues around pensions, things that I think we typically may not engage with until we're a bit older. So I think it's changed my perception around that. I think it has given me a lot of hope, though, because I see so many role models and so many mentors who are older, who I just think are fantastic, that I think, wow, this is where I want to be. It's given me a model of where I want to go and what I want to learn. So I think it's the other thing that has changed quite significantly through my work, though, is my perception of my role in this space. So I really saw myself as an ally when I first joined the space, because it was very much for my mum, for her peers, for my family who were older. And by being in this space, I've realized that, yes, I'm absolutely an ally, but I'm also directly, again, personally affected by it. I think from a personal standpoint, it's made me probably as excited as also aware of the struggles of getting older. And that, I guess, gives me even more motivation for both my family and my loved ones and friends and our community for today as much as for tomorrow.
That was very informative, pretty intense, and very. So on a lighter note now, it's a rapid fire
Yes,
question for you.
rapid fire. Let's do
So
it.
what I need from you is your first thought on the following: most outdated workplace idea.
That there has to be a mandatory retirement stage and age.
At your age really means
Just be whoever you are at any age. There's no right or wrong way to act your age. If you are your age, you are acting your age.
retirement should be
A choice,
a hiring manager's blind spot is.
bias.
Okay, finally, ageism is never in style because.
It absolutely doesn't make sense.
That was very interesting. So, we often talk about hitting the reset later in life. And today's conversation, you've reminded us that maybe the real reset we need is how we think about age at every stage. If someone listening today feels dismissed, underestimated, or invisible because of their age, too young or too old, what would you want them to remember?
I would want them to remember it is not them that's the issue. It's the system and the biases, both in our whole cultures and societies, that is the issue. And that's what needs to change.
Okay. Jacynth, it was a very refreshing conversation and very thoughtful, honest, and incredibly relevant. Thank you so much for the work that you do and the perspective you bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.